Well, we made it to Ruby Beach about the same time that the fog came in, but you can still see there's these stacks with the fog coming in over the top of them and around the trees. This beautiful grey sand turns everything into a black and white in this sort of light. I may end up turning the photograph into a black and white or just leave it as it is, because there's some subtle changes in colour with some greens and some yellows and pale creamy colours in the driftwood. Okay, so here's the setup. You can see I've got it set up so that I've got these pebbles and shallow water in the foreground that sort of lead as a triangle pointing into the gap between the stack in the midground and that big stack in the background. I'm hoping to take a little bit of the reflection off the pebbles in the foreground with a little bit of polarisation, but I don't want too much because I still want to have the reflections of the stacks in that thin sheen of water in that midground as well. So we'll give it a go and see how that one works. As you can see here though, there are a lot of people on the beach. Fortunately they're moving around, so what I'm doing is I've set the camera up to the shot that I want. I've taken some test shots, worked out the shutter speed and the aperture that I want and the framing that I want for the composition, and then I've set the interval timer to take 20 consecutive shots at 30-second intervals, and then I can overlap those in as layers in Photoshop and mask out the people who are moving around in them. It's a cute little trick to be able to get rid of people or other distractions that are moving while the rest of the shot is still. So we'll see how this one goes, and then I'm going to move up the beach and get a bit closer to some of these stacks and try a few more compositions there. Okay, here's a quick tutorial on how to remove unwanted people who are moving around inside the scene. As you saw on the Ruby Beach, there were a whole lot of people moving around here, and I took a whole series of shots and actually needed 4 or 5 of these shots to get rid of all of the people, but I'm just going to show you how to get rid of this person here. So I've got this shot with them in it and then this shot without them. So the first thing we have to do is to get the basic settings that I would typically do in Lightroom and then synchronize those across both those shots. That synchronization will only work if the 2 shots are basically similar. And as you can see here, the background lighting and the background tones are very similar. So we don't have to worry about individually adjusting them. We just get the first one right and then synchronize them. So typically the first thing that I do is to go to lens corrections, turn on remove chromatic aberration, of which there's probably very little here, but it doesn't hurt to do that anyway, and then click enable profile corrections. And that just flattens the image out a little bit and removes the barrel distortion and some of the vignetting around the outside. Then to the basic settings, I want to try and emphasize what little texture there is in this sky, so I'm going to pull the highlights right back. I'm also wanting to get a bit more highlight into the shadows here on the trees and that rock stack, so I'm going to push the shadows up a little bit. I do want to lighten the image a bit, And so I'm going to push the whites up. I don't want to just change the whole exposure. I just want to emphasize those whites. There was no pure white in this image, so I don't want to push that right to 100%, right up to the right-hand side of the histogram. But I'm just going to push that up a little bit. And just to add to a little bit of contrast, I'm going to push the blacks down because I do want some pure blacks in these spots here in the deep shadows. I'm also then going to add just a little bit of clarity. There's no point in adding vibrance or saturation because this is going to end up being a black and white shot, and they don't make any difference to the overall toning. So the next thing I have to do is to select the second shot by holding down the Shift key and clicking on it, and then clicking the sync button. And I've already got all of these corrections turned on, but if you don't, just click check all and synchronize. It doesn't matter that we didn't adjust everything, but it's just easier to select everything and adjust them. And so the next thing I'm going to do is to move these two shots over to Photoshop as separate layers. So I click on, when I've got them both selected, I just right click, go edit in, and down the bottom open as layers in Photoshop. Now I've already done this, so I'm just going to switch over to Photoshop, and you can see the two shots I have here. The bottom one has the person in it, and the upper one has them gone. You can also see there are a couple of smaller people over here, and there's a person over here that really don't change too much in these shots. So I actually needed several shots to do this to get everybody removed. But just to remove this big person, I've got to put a layer mask over this and then block out this little bit with the person in it. So the first thing I need to do is to put that at the top so I can see what I'm doing. And then to click on the layer mask, and a white layer mask comes on by default, which means show everything on that layer. Then if I haven't got the brush tool selected, which I already do, just click B. And then to toggle between black and white, you can just click the X key, but I've already have black selected. I'm also going to drop the flow down to something between 20 and 30% so that I'm not just doing everything at once. If you've got it 100%, as soon as you click on there, it just wipes everything out. What I want to do is to brush this on a little bit at a time so I can see what's happening as I'm doing that. And so if I just come along here and brush over that person, they miraculously disappear and expose the background. So that's it. Now I've walked up about half the distance to these small rocks in the midground. Now I'm creating them into the foreground and zooming in just a little bit at 70mm. I really like the interplay between these rocks and the smaller ones out on the left-hand side, and then the big stack. So hopefully this will make a better composition than the previous one. I'll then move up in a little closer as well to emphasize these rocks in the foreground and the texture on them. They're lovely texture with mussels and barnacles and some anemones and so on. So we'll have a look at that. I've just got to watch the waves when they're coming in and out. The tide is still going out, so I shouldn't get caught with a big one, and there's not much of a swell today anyway. But if I get my feet wet, it's all worth it for art, right? I found another shot on the way over to those stacks. As I got closer to these rocks, I noticed the interesting shapes and textures and lines in them and the reflection in the water. So I'm going to take a few shots of these, and they're really just abstracts. There's nothing pictorial in the sense of it being a recognisable landscape, but it's always interesting to try and find the counterplay between textures and lines and form and shape in an image. And so I'll take a few compositions here and then move over to those other stacks.